to the change in discharge, which has gone up a bit, primarily because of agricultural practices and tile draining in the area. Excuse me. So if you want to make a difference, you can shout all day about there's low oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico, woe is me, my benthic polychaetes are dying. And not a whole lot of people will pay attention to you unless you can link it to some sources. And the sources, obviously, in the Mississippi River Basin are primarily nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural activities, particularly the corn and soybean crop rotation, which is heavily subsidized by the U.S. government to be grown for lots of purposes and not necessarily to feed the world, but to maintain a balance in the farm economy. We know this USGS report came out in 2008, and the Times-Picayune, which is the newspaper in New Orleans, where I have some pretty good contacts, and I can get called off record by a reporter who's just checking something out, and we can talk, and then he can go about his business following up on my leads. There's a movie in the U.S. called Ocean's 11. Well, these are the nutrient 9, and the states that yield most of the nutrients are being targeted for cleaning up some of the river. So all of that excess nutrients in the watershed and landscape changes in the landscape, have led mostly to an increase in the nitrogen, barely an increase in total phosphorus, and everything else has remained fairly flat. And with the increase in the corn crops for biofuels, there is more acreage being planted now, and there's more fertilizer being applied, and we documented in 1991 that there's a direct relationship between the nitrate concentration and fertilizer use in the watershed. And you can see with this increase in corn in 2007, we also had an increase in concentration of nitrate in the river. So given the same amount of water, you have more nitrate being delivered. The science is real clear. More nutrients, more primary production, more flux of carbon to the bottom, more oxygen is consumed, and there is low oxygen maintained below a stratified layer through critical parts, through parts of the year, spring, summer, and fall. And one of our most recent papers, you'll see a lot of Turner et al. And Rabalais and Turner, but this is not all done by myself, this is the point, that the same amount of nitrate now will create a larger area of low oxygen than it did historically. So there's been a regime shift in this ecosystem that makes it easier for hypoxia to form. And this situation is not just happening in the U.S., it's happening worldwide. Developed countries have seen their symptoms of eutrophication, mostly in the 60s to the 80s. And developing countries are now seeing the same symptoms as they also expand with agribusiness, and there's more atmospheric deposition of nitrogen both on the land and in the sea. And the nitrogen increase curve, the reactive nitrogen increase curve, is actually more accelerated than the increase in CO2 in the atmosphere. So we're not only changing, this is not a big climate change issue. This is going to be a nitrogen global issue, which is even a little more difficult to understand than climate change. So getting back to how the scientists have played a role in making the policy, I've told you we've done this media thing. We continue to do it. We just put a press release out about the size prediction for this year, and I've got NBC wanting to go and everybody, but they don't want to work 12-hour shifts. They just want to sit in the galley and eat the good food. So we need to start working on this management strategy and developing a plan. So we brought in one of the best-known social scientists we could to Cocodrie, Louisiana, and put him to work in helping us create our management, not really. A lot of people, both states, tribes, federal government, started coming up with this management strategy. And the first part was, of course, very thick reports on the science and an integration of the science. The second part was an action plan that was almost not signed because of the states involved in the watershed and the reluctance to try to do anything about the nutrients being delivered to the Gulf. At that point, we had a very strong EPA and a very strong NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So this was delayed. It says January 2001. If you know anything about U.S. elections, particularly from this last year, somebody goes out in early January and somebody comes in late January. And this ended up on the desk of Bill Clinton, and then sat on the desk of George Bush later in January of that year, and has languished a whole lot. Some of the other things that we've done, there's, what's this guy's name? Randy Olson. Randy Olson had a little Rotten Jellyfish Award video once, and it showed the Mississippi River sort of like flowing down into the Gulf of Mexico and making a big black blob that turned into a skull and crossbones. And then it turned into a blob that looked like the state of New Jersey, because this thing is very often the size of the state of New Jersey. And so the new EPA administrator was Christine Todd Whitman, who previously was the governor of the state of New Jersey. And we had a meeting in 2002. She gave the plenary address. She had gotten the message, and I organized the meeting, and I was sitting very close to the front, and she said, I really do wish that somebody would equate this to something other than the size of the state of New Jersey. Pick on Rhode Island or Connecticut or Massachusetts. And then but that made her start, she reformed the task force in 2002, and we got started again. But there was still a lot of people who didn't want to move forward. The only reason the action plan was formed because there was a environmental goal of reaching 5,000 square kilometers by the year 2015 over a 5-year running average, because there is climatic variability, either due to droughts, floods, or hurricanes. These were going to be, at that time, we thought it would take 30% reduction in nitrogen. We didn't just pull it out of the hat. We actually did some calculations. But most of the models now show that you need to reduce 35 to 45% to make this goal. And it is all voluntary and incentive-based. And the biggest effort has been in education by lots of different people, both in the Midwest and in the Gulf of Mexico. I probably give more talks in the Midwest than I do the Gulf. Subsequently, this adaptive management plan wanted a 5-year assessment. Well, not much had been done in 5 years, and it was a little soon to start assessing. But one of the things that was assessed was, go past that. Let me see. One of the things that was assessed was the science, and it was like a witch hunt on the science. Even with all of the peer-reviewed publications, there were so many people at these meetings who kept raising all of these issues that we thought had been put to rest. And the phosphorus issue was raised, and yes, phosphorus is important and it's limiting, but that's because there's so much more nitrogen in the system now than historically that phosphorus is a problem, and it's only a problem certain times, and just more and more red flags or diversions or ways to try to defeat the science. Fortunately, the EPA Science Advisory Board came out with a strong statement that supported the science, that nitrogen drives the system, phosphorus is important, and therefore we should focus on both nitrogen and phosphorus, which is certainly not what some of the Midwestern states wanted to hear. They wanted to hear, let's focus on phosphorus, but now let's focus on both of them. And they supported the 5,000 square kilometer coastal goal, but noted that it was all voluntary. we hadn't made much progress with the voluntary. So where's the science in this? The scientists are providing publications to this review board. They're presenting lectures if they were invited. I was not invited at all to talk to this advisory panel. I'm not really sure why. Some of us felt a little left out. But anyway, so they want to know, how can we do this? Well, we're going to target the areas where most of the nutrient yield and load is from. And this is the corn-soybean rotation that's very leaky because it's tile drained. And this is coming at a time when we are now not necessarily putting corn chips into the body of this person who has not made good personal choices, and instead putting it into ethanol that is going to cost more energy and waste more land. But here's... can I win for losing? Well, it seems like an uphill battle at times because there's even more and more corn-soybean rotation right now. So after that, Science Advisory Board met, and they put their report out in 2008. The same thing was going parallel with the Hypoxia Action Plan, but many of the states were eroding that plan more and more. It had been a pretty weak plan before it started, and there were a lot of strong interests that we were eroding it even more, but there wasn't much push from the EPA to make it stronger. It also took the impetus from some sub-basin areas directly onto the states to make a difference, and some states weren't going to make any difference. And they were given no resources to work with to make a difference. So the action plan, according to the Times-Picayune, was stagnating and wasn't going to do anything good at all to help the hypoxia in the Gulf of Mexico. And their thought was that stacks of papers do not equal reductions in nutrient loads, and also gave this the Hypoxia No Action Plan, NOMER, in newspapers. There's a lot of public support for making a difference. There's a lot of education, a lot of people know, and there are good management techniques that can be done in the watershed to make a difference. There are other bodies in the U.S. that are worried about the situation. The National Research Council of the National Academies has had two committees that have been completed and one that has just been formed. The first one basically noted that the Mississippi River was an orphan, that there was no federal oversight or coordinated and integrated oversight into the nutrients, and that the EPA could use components of the Clean Water Act to try to make a difference. The second one actually took components of the Clean Water Act, and I've been serving on all of these committees with a lot of really good people, including an assistant administrator for water, Tracy Meehan. The next one actually came up with a plan for Mississippi River Center and ways that the USDA and EPA could work together, and EPA has started discussions with the USDA. And the one that's just been formed is going to look at parts of the Clean Water Act, specific parts of the Clean Water Act that can be used to be implemented. And it is now after January, it's after the end of January in 2009. And our hope is that with the new administration in the EPA and NOAA, that this will get more attention, especially since the administrator of NOAA does hypoxia research off of the Oregon coast. So we're hoping that more things can be done. We've talked a lot about the 600-pound gorilla in the room when we're talking about coastal zone management. In Louisiana, it's an 8 or 10-foot alligator that's swallowing up all of our efforts. But we have to keep busy and keep working on it. And some people have to just keep putting themselves out more into the forefront. And I've been named the Queen of Hypoxia. That's the Swedish Academy of Science. I'm giving a talk in Sweden. And I tried to make my own crown when I was giving a lecture to my students but Alice says I look more like an elk than a queen. Okay, just quickly, I want to talk a little bit about the future, and these slides will be in the lecture in case you want them, but some things are going to happen. Anthropogenic activities are going to continue to influence the watersheds with increased nutrients and altered hydrology, either withdrawal of water or diversions of water, or climate variability may increase water flow, and that would increase the flux of nutrients to the shelf. That cycle of enhanced primary production will lead to worsening effects of low oxygen. In the Mississippi River Basin, the upper part is predicted to have more rain, so there will be more flux. The lower part's predicted to have less rain. But so that climate variability not only affects the flux of nutrients, but it can also affect the stratification. An increase in air temperature can increase the stratification. Metabolic rates can change. There are all kinds of things that can come into a new scenario for what eutrophication and its associated problems might look like in the Gulf of Mexico. And tropical storms, I think there's still an argument about whether they'll be more and more frequent and more severe. I don't think we've decided that. And the other one I wanted to show you, because it's one of my favorite things, I drew this a long time ago, and it basically takes nitrogen, which is a molecule, but in this particular sense, it's nitrogen with dollar signs on the side of them, so they're called nitrollers. And then we have p-ollers and we have carbon-ollers. I started this with just nitrogen, but I had to add phosphorus eventually. But basically, most of the fertilizer that is spread on the fields in the Midwest is manufactured in the state of Louisiana because we have such cheap natural gas, and you need heat for the process. So the fertilizer goes up as anhydrous ammonia in tank cars or pipelines, gets spread on the field, grows the corn, feeds the hogs, not just the hogs there, but also over here, and apparently a lot of Delmarva chickens in Bill's backyard. And then more nitrogen gets back into the system, not even into this system, but this nitrogen comes back down and fuels the growth of the algae and creates this low oxygen area in the Gulf. Also, phosphorus is mined in Florida and shipped across the Gulf in barges because it's cheaper to process it in Louisiana because of the extra, or the cheaper until now, natural gas. And so it goes back up into the fields and comes back down. It does support good fisheries, but we've had a shift, like most eutrophied systems, from a more benthic fishery to a more pelagic fishery of trash fish, which are menhaden, which get ground up and put into meal that goes back up the Mississippi River into feeding the chickens and comes back down. So the point, and we've talked about it a lot, is there are a lot there. We know some of the issues, but many of them are not science issues. They're global economy issues, and they're social issues. And the other one I want to show is the nitrollers. Whoops. God. I did that. Never mind. I did that in Washington, too. But the nitrollers that flow out of the farm economy are 98 billion, and out of the shrimp fishery industry is 2.8 billion. And a lot of nitrollers flow from the capital of the U.S. to subsidies in the farm, but you don't see any of these nitrollers coming down this way. So it's a very complex legal, social, cultural, global issue, and this is just my example from my backyard, from a large watershed, large catchment, and the role that I've had in being a very fortunate person to be able to do the science in this area, and then also being able to take it to the public and make a difference. Thank you.